Welcome back, everyone. We've got another episode of Natural Bodybuilding Worldwide. We're really excited about our guest today. We've got with us Jon Harris, who really needs no introduction. But for those of you who are maybe sort of newer to the sport, Jon is a WNBF pro. He gained his pro card after he took the 2003 BNBF British overall title. He went on in his very first Worlds to take second in the lightweight class at the WNBF Worlds. Came back in 2004 and took another second place title at the WNBF Worlds in the lightweight class. Following a year off in 2005, Jon came back to take not only his class in the middleweights in 2005, but also that illustrious overall WNBF world title, and then rounded off things with another second place class finish in 2007. Obviously Jon's got a lot of history in the sport. From my perspective, I'm really excited about this because Jon is sort of one of the people who I guess introduced me to the sort of fact that there was such a thing as natural bodybuilding. It was sort of yourself, Vicky McCann and Rob Hope that I first sort of came across, and I think it was actually in a Maxi Muscle catalogue that I saw your picture and your name, and that sort of introduced me to the forum, the Jon Harris forum, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about later. But obviously, we're really happy to have Jon on with us. We know that you may have seen that Jon's done a recent podcast with AJ and Lee Camp, which is a very comprehensive chat. So what we want to do is make this a bit of a follow on and talk about other topics and maybe delve into certain topics in a bit more detail, to sort of complement each other. So I'd recommend, if you haven't already, to have a listen to that podcast before this one, maybe. So without further ado, welcome, Jon. How are you today?
Hi guys, I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, I'm all ready for a nice session here. As I say, the last show was a bit of a monster. We did over 3 hours, so we'll see where this one goes today. But hopefully, there's lots of extra nuggets we can dig out from our bodybuilding past to share with everybody. So really excited, really looking forward to it. Thanks ever so much for the opportunity, and hello to everyone online watching.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for being on, mate.
Yeah, so obviously we had a bit of a briefing, Jon, and discussed what we might talk about. And I suppose you covered in quite a bit of detail your sort of early days in the sport and getting into training on AJ's podcast. But we just wanted to ask a little bit further about, when you in those early days, was there anyone in particular who sort of influenced you and who you looked up to as sort of a role model in the sport, and maybe even within your gym, someone who guided you and taught you the principles of training and when you were thinking about competing?
Yeah, well, this goes back a long time. I actually started training when I was about 12, 13 years old. I had a home gym, and my brothers trained it. I've got 3 older brothers, an older sister as well, but my older brothers had a home gym. So that's where I started working out. So at that point, I didn't really have too many people around me other than my brothers to look up to. But I do remember seeing a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger. I think this was something like the 1980 Guinness Book of World Records, and seeing his image in there as Mr. Olympia. I think he was like 6-time Mr. Olympia or something at that point. But he was described as the most perfectly developed man in history. And it was an amazing image. And you can still find this black and white online today. And that definitely struck a chord. So that was probably the first image I ever saw, which resonated with me as a young man in my early teen years. but I didn't really start latching on to the competitive bodybuilding scene until I joined my first commercial gym, which was, I think, about the age of 16. And then I started watching some of the early Olympia videos. Well, I say early, they weren't particularly early at the time. This was back in the 90s. So I started following, you know, some of the classic physiques of that time. So we're talking about Lee Labrada, Sean Ray, guys like that who had like really sort of classic aesthetic physiques. So those were the sorts of physiques I was looking up to. Obviously, all the physiques back in those days were more streamlined, more aesthetic. Berry Dumay, that was another one. Bob Paris. So, I mean, you guys would no doubt remember these classic physiques from yesteryear. So this was what I was absorbed in when I was first training in my proper commercial gym. And of course, this was back in my junior days. So I was competing at the age of 17. Back in my first contest was 1992. So yeah, those were the kind of physiques that were my guiding light. But in terms of people who helped me with my contest prep, I just read Flex articles, really, Muscle and Fitness, because we had the magazines back then. We had a big choice of mags, and I always used to remember saving up my pocket money and buying these magazines off the shelf and just absolutely devouring them, because that was our only source of information back then. We didn't have the internet, it didn't exist, social media didn't exist, so all our information came from the magazines or through the conversations we had in the gym with our mates, and that's how knowledge was shared. I did pick up some pointers from the lads in the gym. I was very fortunate to train in a commercial gym at 16 where there were other competitive bodybuilders around, so I was able to sort of compare notes, pick up some tips on diet, on training, and sort of sketch a plan together. But right from the outset, I wouldn't say I ever had a coach. It was more of a case of just pulling in. Well, coaches didn't really exist back then, but it was more of a case of just talking to other people, reading the magazines, and just building my own plan. And that's kind of how it started out in the early days as a junior.
Yeah, awesome. And one thing in particular which has always sort of stood out for me with yourself, John, is you're always quite well known for your posing, your sort of classical posing. And I remember actually the first ever show I went to was the NPA British Finals in 2006, which was where you did a guest spot, if you remember.
Yeah.
But I was just, when you were first sort of getting into bodybuilding in those early days when you competed as a junior, did you have anyone to sort of teach you how to pose, or was it just a case of watching the likes of, you know, Labrada, Sean Ray, these people, and just sort of picking up and sort of trial and error sort of thing?
It was trial and error. I didn't have a coach. I did watch all the Olympia videos. We had a big selection of these videos at the gym. The guy who ran it was very into bodybuilding, so I was able to borrow the videos, take them home, watch them, rewind the video, watch the video again. So I did an awful lot of stopping, pausing, rewinding, and emulating some of the poses of the greats, and you know, stealing little bits here and there where I could. I never had a choreographer, anyone who really went through my routine and designed or choreographed a routine for me. But once again, I could take my routine into the gym, show the guys there. They would clear a little space in the mirror for me. They'd put my music on. I'd do my posing routine and they'd critique it. So even at that early point, I had people looking over my shoulder, telling me what worked and what didn't work. So I wasn't completely on my own, but I didn't really have anyone designing my own routines. That was very much my own creation. I picked my own music and just went with it. But even back then, I was very conscientious of what music I wanted to pose to, how I was going to structure my routines, and learned very early on about piecing together transitions and timing and all that stuff, which comes together to make a nice posing routine. And ever since those early days, I've always put an awful lot of effort into the posing routines, because I just think like bodybuilding is a sport, but also it's sort of a bit of a performance art as well. You know, I look at it from that angle too, not just a sport, and I've always seen it like that. I treat the body as a sculpture, and I think I'm sculpting a model when I'm in the gym, and that's my relationship to the sport, if you will. So putting together an artistic, creative routine was just a natural extension of that, really.
When you talk about you putting your posing routines together and choosing your music, how do you choose your music, and what kind of music you preferred? What do you favour?
Well, I prefer the slight. Well, I've used a mixed bag actually over the years. I've not just stuck to one style. I've posed to rock music. I've posed to power ballads as well. Big pieces with a set rhythm and tempo, with highs and lows, so you can choreograph key poses to key moments in the music. That's really what I was looking at, or listening to rather, when I was trying to select a piece of music that I composed to. It's very hard for me to say exactly what the formula is for picking a piece of posing music, other than, and you guys can probably relate to this, you know it when you hear it. Yeah. You think, oh, hang on, that's a song on the radio, I could pose to this, and a bell goes off in your head, and you're looking for a piece of paper so you can write it down and make a note. So next time you're in the throes of the contest prep, you've got a little short list, and I did this. I'm sure everyone does the same, but you have a little list of tracks, and you go through them. You maybe hit a few poses to the tunes, and then you squash the tune down as well to sort of 60 seconds or 90 seconds or however long you've got to pose by the federation. Then you see where you can create a nice routine in that. It's a little bit of trial and error. I wouldn't say there's an exact formula to it, but I certainly I avoided certain kinds of music. I wasn't really into sort of heavy metal, for example. It just didn't suit my classical lines, didn't suit my physique. So I was guided by pieces of music that suited my physique and suited the way I like to present my physique, really.
Yeah. And can you remember the your favorite track and your favorite routine at all?
Oh, there's a few. I did like to pose to U2. I remember my debut WNBF show. I posed to "Beautiful Day" by U2, which was a really nice track. And then with some nice highs and lows. That was a fun memory. Going into the Worlds, I posed to some big tracks by Kelly Clarkson. Here's another thing as well. I'll say this early on. When I was competing out in the States, so I was always mindful of the music they liked out there as well. So I always thought if I posted something obscure and British in America, no one would even know what track it is. So I always thought, well, what might be at least a known piece of music stateside. I'm not sure if that made any difference. It probably didn't. It was just my way of trying to analyze things and trying to put together a routine to a piece of music that might sort of get the crowd clapping.
Yeah, I was just going to say there. I think when you pose, I mean, I do especially. I like to try and pick a song that not only do I like and compose to, but one that can that the audience can immediately get on board with and get behind you with and enjoy it, because I think sometimes there's nothing more loud than the silence of a crowd in a bodybuilding. So if they don't know the song, or if it's just too much. So I get where you're coming from with that completely.
Yeah. And you touched on something there, John, when you were talking about posing in the gym with all the lads sort of giving you feedback and things, and that idea of the camaraderie in bodybuilding. And there's been obviously quite a big shift these days with the emergence of online there's a lot more sort of prep coaches, whereas maybe 10 years ago, it was much more a case of you did your own thing, but you got sort of feedback and advice from mates, essentially. What are your thoughts on that? The way things contrast, because I know, I mean, it's by no means a bad thing that we've got access now to much more coaches, but do you feel in a way that there's a bit of a loss of that camaraderie amongst sort of fellow competitors?
I agree, Tom. I think there's something lost in translation here over the years, and I've certainly noticed it. There was no coaches available when I was competing, certainly back in the 90s. It's something that I think has probably come in, broadly speaking, maybe in the last sort of 10 years or so. And when I was competing in my early days, I'd always talk to, as you mentioned, friends, trusted friends in the sport who trained. You'd compare notes. You'd use your friends as a sounding board. I used to do this thing where I'd have my friends come and take a look. So you'd be 6 weeks out from the contest. No one's seen you, perhaps, but you want someone to check over your condition. So you'd either go to the gym or someone will come to your house, and then you'd be down to your boxer shorts, and then they'd take a look at your condition and they'd say, oh yeah, you need to lose a little bit more fat, or you're ahead of schedule, or you're behind of schedule. But it was all very informal. But now, obviously, the coaches come on board and take care of all of this. And what tends to happen, what I've noticed that the difference is in perhaps the way that this all played out through the Bodybuilding Forum Natural Muscle, which I ran, because back in the early days, a lot of information was shared pre-contest prep on the forums, which actually was fuel for the threads, because we'd have these great, interesting debates about contest prep and what people were doing and what people weren't doing. But then as the proliferation of coaches came on board, I sensed a degree of people withdrawing from the forums and then taking everything privately offline with their coaches. So in a sense, then the knowledge got drawn out of the pool, if you will.
Yeah.
It's a shame, but having said that, you can't deny. Well, it's certainly my experience. I'm seeing people coming in much better condition in recent years on stage. So I think that's probably a result of people working with good coaches who are getting them ready for contests, where perhaps if they hadn't got a coach, they'd mistime their peak and they'd turn up on stage out of shape. So I think there's a role there for coaches, but this is a subject that can go on and on and on. We could really get into the weeds with this, because there's all sorts of pros and cons for and against coaches, and this is based on the assumption that all coaches work to a solid plan and deliver the results, and we don't live in an ideal world, and there are all manner of coaches out there. So it's a little bit of a complicated area.
Yeah, and I suppose just one thought I had is I think there is still that sort of camaraderie and community feel within some aspects of the sport. So, for example, I was just thinking, there's the BNBF and I think the UKDFBA put on these clubs as well, where people come together and obviously get feedback from experienced pros, but also a way of sort of connecting with each other. So I suppose there is some element of it still in the sport, but I suppose as you say, there's a big part of things which has become a bit more private, and it's just sort of a one-to-one coach and client setup, isn't it? But moving on a little bit, you're talking about, we were just touching on the forum there, and I remember going on the forum and seeing some of these trips where the likes of yourself, Vicky McCann, Rob Hope, Nigel Davis, Cheryl Myers, all these people who were sort of like pioneers of the sport in this country, going over to the States and sort of flying the flag for the UK. And that was very much a team, a team atmosphere, it seemed. Is there any sort of particular aspects or sort of fondest memories that you have from any of those trips?
I think the first trip out will always be the most memorable, because I'd never been out to New York before. So that first trip for me in 2003, when I won the pro card, was my first time on a transatlantic flight to New York. So there was so much to take in. It was all completely new. And it was a great team spirit, absolutely. I remember wearing my team tracksuit. We all had our red, white and blue team tracksuits to wear, and then just arriving at the venue for the athletes meeting, and just being there with everybody in this absolutely enormous athletes meeting, where we probably had, well, it was so big, I think the meeting was split over two meetings, an amateur meeting and a pro meeting. So we couldn't literally get all the WNBF and INBF athletes into one space for that. So that was chopped up. But then at the meeting, there was just like all these little groups of coloured tracksuits from all the different countries. England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, obviously all in Team GB. But then aside of that, you've got the American team, you've got the Canadian team, Italian, Swiss, China. I could go on and on and on. But it was just a sense, a feeling of being on a world stage, competing in a big world championships, but being part of something very British. It's a very difficult thing to explain, but a great sense of national pride to be there, and extremely humbling to be able to compete against some absolute legends in the sport who I looked up to. I mean, I mentioned earlier on about looking up to some of the guys in the 90s, from the Olympias, because that's all I had access to back in then, pre-internet. But coming into the WNBF, I had a few years of looking up to the athletes there as I worked my way up through the amateur ranks, looking up to guys like Nigel Davis, in the British team, and then the Americans. I think Dave Goodin was a guy who I had tremendous admiration for, and what he'd achieved, because he was like a two-time world champion. Nigel had come runner-up twice. So when I got out there as a pro, I felt a little bit overwhelmed by it initially, I must admit, and whether I was actually ready for all that. And certainly my expectations at that first show were relatively low. I just wanted to sort of crack top 8. So it was great how it turned out. But yeah, just to sort of like just touch again on the team spirit thing. It was lovely, and lots of small moments throughout the trip, and through all the trips that I made out there. We did a lot of sightseeing after the show as well. So there was trips away from the venue. We went out for lovely meals with the team and got to reminisce on all the events that happened, the stories over the last few days when the show was running. And another memorable moment for me was the photo shoot, which we always got invited. The British team always got lots of invites to go to the photo shoot the day after. And this was to collect all the images for Natural Bodybuilding and Fitness magazine, because they needed photos for their future issues. And a lot of those photos came from the competitions itself and from the photo shoots that happened the day after. And of course, this was the only chance that the photographers had to get the photos of the British athletes while we were actually in shape in New York. So we spent a lot of time together at the photo shoots, and I remember having lots of great conversations with all the British team, the day after, when we could let our hair down and eat a little bit of food and relax. Before the show, everything was always a little bit tense, so you couldn't really relax and sit back and chill out with everyone before the show, because there was always so much to do as well. We were busy filling out forms. There was a lot of forms to fill out to compete out there. There was a lot of running around to do to get all your food sorted, because we weren't allowed to take food into, overseas. There's a lot of restrictions on things like that. And we had to do all the drug testing as well. Every athlete had to be drug tested at the WNBF World. So it was an absolute, the organisational, there was a huge amount to get through to get all the athletes ready for the stage. So there was definitely a sort of before and after to the show. Lots of stress before, lots of relaxation afterwards.
Yeah, awesome. And I was just going to ask, this is just out of interest, when you won the 2006, when you took that overall title, how did you get that trophy back?
In bits. I had to dismantle it because it wouldn't go into an overhead. Into an overhead cabin, or it was also too big to go into the hold as well, and I think it would have just broken up. So fortunately it's unscrewed, and I managed to just spread the parts between my hand luggage and my suitcase. Everything was wrapped in towels and clothes, and very, very carefully to make sure it didn't get damaged, and I got it back in one piece. But it was big. I mean, that trophy's huge. It was probably about 4 foot tall. And it weighed a lot. I think it bumped my luggage weight over the limit, I think.
Basically,
if no one's seen that, then have a look on Jon's website. There's some pictures of, and it'll just just blow your mind on how he's transported that from New York. So but it's awesome hearing that those stories there, because it's something Lee touched on about the sort of importance of a sort of up and coming competitor knowing the history and the the champions that have sort of paved the way, and I think it's, I've said this a few times, it's undoubtedly the sport the way it is in the UK today would not be the way it is if it weren't for the likes of yourself, Vicky, Rob, Nigel, Wes Clark, Cheryl. I think it is important to have that context and know about the history of the sport. Personally, that's what I think.
I agree. There was an awful lot of work that was done back in those early days, and going back to the BNBF, but before that, the A&B as well, going back in the 90s. I mean, this predates my history with natural bodybuilding, so I didn't get involved until 2001. But there was a lot that went on. Even teams that went out to the Worlds pre-2000. I think the BNBF's first team that went out was 2000. That would have been like Vicky, Karen Mason, Andy Palmer, Andy Farrell, Nigel Davis. And then that was one of the first teams that went out in 2000. And that's what got hooked into natural bodybuilding, was seeing an article on the British team and reading about the WNBF pro status. And that just connected with me, resonated, and that got me involved. So these little pieces of the jigsaw over history is what's responsible for pulling people in and pushing the sport forward. So if I had not seen that article in that magazine, I may never have found out about the federation and not made my comeback. So you could be sat here talking to another natural bodybuilder, so things could be completely different. But yeah, I mean, they had some great results. I mean, just going back to Nigel again, because like Nigel, when I faced Nigel, he'd already had like 3 world attempts already in the bag before he faced me in competition and eventually won. I think he'd got 2 runner-up spots at the Worlds in like 2000 and 2002, losing out to Dave Goodin one year and then Paul Neal another. And then I think in his first year, I mean, if we can wind the clock back even further, I think Nigel's first competition there was in 96. I think that was his first show. I don't think he placed too well in that one, but little small fact here, the guy who won was that show in the lightweights was Kai Green.
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
We all know who Kai Green is now, don't we? So, yeah. But Kai Green started out in the WNBF as a natural bodybuilder. And I remember Nigel telling me that story about being on stage with Kai, and it's quite an interesting story, that. But even back then, he was a big guy. Yeah, for a lightweight, obviously a short guy, but yeah, he won that show in '96. But there's lots of little pockets of history that date back there, and it's important to get this stuff on the record through shows like this, definitely.
Yeah, and you mentioned about Kai Green there. I believe, didn't you also compete in a show where Sean Clarida wasn't he in one of the? I'm trying to look back now.
He was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Sean is. Yeah.
Was it 07?
See, this might be tricky for me recalling the exact date here. I definitely competed against Sean Clarida. You may even have been, 2003, in my first show. He competed as a lightweight, and he didn't win. I think the show I remember him competing, which may have been 2003, but I need to double check on that. But he was up there, top 3. I think he did get beat, by possibly Brian Whitaker and Luis Santiago. I know, mind you, that was 2006 when Luis Santiago competed. So, but yeah, just to sort of summarise, I definitely know Sean Clarida competed in the era that I was competing. He was a much smaller guy, obviously, competing in the natural ranks, and good, very compact, tiny joints, and you could see there was a lot of potential there, but he decided, obviously, at some point to exit the WNBF and follow a different path, like Kai Green, and pursue the IFBB ranks. And obviously, we all know what happened there. He's done quite well by reports in the IFBB, hasn't he? So.
Yeah. Before I move on, Chris, have you got any further questions at the moment? Before I've got a big long list, so
have we? Right. Well,
you feel.
Just something sprung to mind there with you saying, with the likes of Kai Green, Sean Clarida making that decision to break away from the WNBF and chase the, I suppose the big leagues, for want of a better expression. What kept did that thought ever cross your mind way back, or have you always wanted to remain natural?
Yeah, for me, there was a very small period when I was 19. I'd just returned from the IFBB Worlds. So I started out in the EFBB as a junior, and I got an invite to compete in the IFBB Worlds in '94 when I was 19. So I did that show, but it was a whitewash for me. I didn't crack the top 6. I'm guessing I placed somewhere between maybe 6 and 10. I never actually got my scorecard though, so I can't go on record with my placement. But I know I was up against assisted athletes in that show. I could just tell by the way they looked. Even though it was a drug tested event, my sixth sense told me something. But coming back on that plane journey, it was that was the last show I did as a junior. And even though I loved the experience, I felt slightly demoralised because I thought, I'm never going to win on this playing field, because I knew I was on an uneven playing field. And then it was a case of, well, there's 2 ways we can level this playing field up. Either I go on the gear and, go back and compete in the FBB and maybe the IFBB if I was successful again, and then really ramp things up, or I decide to stay clean and just carry on. As it happened, I decided to stay clean, but I didn't pursue any more bodybuilding at that point either. I made a decision to actually draw a line under the sport and carry on with other aspects of my life. But I did have the conversation with myself, yes. It wasn't a very long conversation. For me, I never entered the sport to be the biggest guy on there, to win, try and win like the big league IFBB shows. My health was always more important to me, and there was a host of other reasons why I didn't want to go down that route as well. And certainly, when I was in the WNBF competing, I had already made that decision to stay natural. So that thought never re-entered my head again. Just touching back to, say, Kai Green, who competed in the WNBF, got to the very top, and then made a decision to jump leagues to the IFBB, and then everything else that comes with that decision. I'd already been through that process years and years ago. So, for me, at that point, WNBF was my pinnacle. There was no further ladder to climb.
Right. Yeah, sure. And just out of interest for everyone, whilst you were talking there, I was just searching. So it was actually the 2007 Worlds where Sean Clarida, he took second to Brian Whittaker in the lightweight class.
Okay.
So, yeah. Good. So moving on slightly, we were talking a little bit about your sort of hiatus from was it about 7 years from your EFBB junior days to when you came back in, I believe, 2001 with the BNBF. I was just a little bit interested about that period and whether, from a personal perspective, looking back, you're sort of glad that you did that, because it's obviously quite an important time in your life. You're sort of late teens, early 20s. You were pursuing a career. There's obviously lots of life experiences, university, college, things like that, which, potentially, if you were sort of consistently competing throughout that period of time, you could maybe have missed out on certain things. So is that something that you sort of look back on and think that you're glad you did, or you hadn't really given it much thought?
It's a very good question, Tom, and I don't actually believe even been asked this one before. So it's an interesting one to ponder, because there's a lot of things that happened in those 7 years which steered my life plan. So my gut feeling on that question is that I'm glad I took that time off, because if I'd competed throughout those years, knowing the kind of person that I am, in the sense that if I was competing, I would have pushed everything to the side. I think I would have struggled to graduate, with an honours degree. I think I would have struggled to get my first job in the software industry, if I was competing, and struggled to climb the career ladder. And I mean, like just to sort of look at it from another angle as well, from a personal point of view. In 2007, I went out on a boys' holiday and met my future wife. So if I was dieting for a contest in 97, I wouldn't even have met my wife, because I wouldn't have been on a lad's holiday. So there's little things like this. So I had to live a normal life in order to make those little decisions, which actually can lead you down a path into bigger things. So I'm glad I took that time out. I mean, you could argue that if I was competing throughout the late 90s, that I could have perhaps accelerated my progress into the natural. This is assuming I'd found the ANB in the late 90s, because the BNBF didn't exist. So I'd have had to find the ANB and then work through the ANB amateur ranks, and then hopefully won an overall. This was when Keith Fox was in charge, wasn't it? Keith Fox ran the ANB. So there would have been a whole ladder to climb there. And then maybe, arguably, if I'd have done really well, I could have found myself on some of those early trips, maybe back in 96 or 98, 2000, something like that. But would it have made that much difference? I don't know. I still class myself as relatively young-ish when I turned pro in 2003. I was 28. So, if I'd have left it another 10 years, then maybe there would have been a sense of regret that I'd left things a bit too late. But I still think I was young enough to be able to go at full steam ahead with bodybuilding and reap the most I could from the sport in the years that I've got left.
Yeah,
I think that's a good point for a lot of the teens and juniors that are coming through the ranks. So of course, some of them are very, very good, and it's going to be great to watch those people develop and become even better bodybuilders, but maybe not spend quite as much time on that, and to and concentrate on other aspects of life, because at the end of it all, them stages are like it's a cliche thing that we say now. The stage is always going to be there, but there are other things that are actually quite important in life. And whilst we all love bodybuilding and training and things like that, it's important. And I think what we're trying to get at is strike that balance between both. Enjoy it, compete, but don't neglect the people around you and other experiences, because you don't want to get to a certain age and look back and regret having not done some things. So I think that's just a great point that you've made there, and I hope that some of the younger ones take it on board and whilst continue to take it seriously. Don't push it too far, and don't push people away, because I think that tells its own story, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting to hear your thoughts on that, John. And during that period, were you still sort of consistently training and sort of following a bit of a nutrition plan? Were you still sort of on a bodybuilding focused sort of training schedule?
Sort of. I'm not going to sit here and say I was the strictest person during that period. I was a young man in my early 20s, enjoying myself. So yes, I was training, I was hitting the gym, but I was taking little layoffs here and there. I was cheating on my diet. I was drinking a little bit of alcohol here and there, doing all the normal stuff that young men do, having fun. And I had to do it that way. I couldn't be religious about training in that period. I mean, if I was religious, then I would have been competing. So I made a decision to not compete. Therefore, all the ramifications of not competing were allowed to unfold. I was able to let my hair down, take holidays every year with my friends, meet people, have fun, build up my life experience, build up my career, set up my business, because I set up my first business in 1999. And I don't think I would have had the resources or the willpower to have been brave enough to do that in 99 if I'd have got a calendar full of contests to do. It just wouldn't have ever happened. So I needed a lot of freedom around me to make those big decisions. So my advice to juniors would be to train and get in the gym, keep training, add in mass, eat well, be careful about it. I'm not saying don't compete as a junior. I competed as a junior, so you can still compete as a junior or in your early 20s as in the open division or novice division, but just do not do it and sacrifice other important aspects of your life growing up. Try and get the balance right, and it's a hard balance to do. I know what it's like, because bodybuilding is a very all-consuming sport, and it can be very easy to just like push everything away to make room for bodybuilding so you can commit. But it's be careful, and or if you do want to compete, maybe think about competing and then taking a year or two off in between your shows. You don't have to compete every single year. I mean, I came back to the sport and I had a big run of competing back to back for about 4 years. But even then, after that, I needed a break. But I was in my late 20s then, so my career was sorted out. I bought my first house. Things were kind of in place.
Yeah.
I've got stability there. And if I'd have attempted to shoot for a pro card in my early 20s, let's say if I'd followed the A&B route and wanted to get my pro card then, I could be still living in my mum and dad's house, because I'd have never sort of gone out and done all those big things you have to do as a young man to set your life up. and maybe that's a slightly extreme example, but I've always been quite an extreme bodybuilder anyway, and dedicated once I'd flipped that switch to compete. So I was always very careful that things in my life were very stable around me when I flipped that switch to compete, because I'd make a huge amount of sacrifices.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? Obviously, all three of us here absolutely love bodybuilding, but it's being mindful that, I suppose, there's a right time, and what you don't want to do is look back in future years and say, oh well, I regret missing out on X, Y, and Z because of bodybuilding. It's a difficult one, isn't it? But I think you've sort of summarised things very well there, John. And it's and like Chris says, the stage is always going to be there, whereas certain other experiences may not be, and you have to sort of just make the most of those at the time. So. Any more thoughts on that, or should we move on?
No,
I think that's covered it pretty well.
You've covered it really well there, and thanks for that.
Yeah, and the next thing I was just going to talk about is I know you talked quite a bit with AJ about training in general. I was just quite interested about the famous cabin gym. For those of you that don't know, John built his own log cabin in his garden, which became his gym. And there's still, I think the article's still on your website, isn't it?
It is.
And from what I believe, you trained actually predominantly in there, in your run up to the 2006 Worlds. And I was just interested about, training on your own in a home environment. Did you ever find it difficult to motivate yourself, or have you always been sort of quite self-motivated to train on your own? And if you did have any difficulties, how did you overcome them?
That's a good question. Well, when I first built the gym, it was built in 2005 when I was having a year off from competing. So I needed a project to keep me busy. So I built the gym then. It was a big log cabin, and I made a point of kitting it out with the best kits I could afford, basically. So I saved up all my pocket money and bought good quality Cybex equipment. And it's lovely to train on. And I really enjoyed training in there in the first year, because I was like a kid in a sweet shop. It was all brand new, well, refurbished equipment, but it felt brand new. And it was just a novelty. So I got a home gym, which I'd always wanted, and it was all my kit hand-picked, and I was training in a lovely little environment. I had quite a limited selection of kit, but no, I didn't struggle at all in that first year or two. Obviously, 2005 I didn't compete, but 2006 I came back. But just knowing that I was making a comeback in 2006, that was enough to motivate me. I knew I'd be up against some incredible physiques that year at the Worlds. Every year it's always stacked with talent. So just going into the gym and knowing that certain people might be there who I'd be up against was enough fire for me. I always found that offered ample motivation to get the job done in the gym. I didn't necessarily need a training partner. And I'd conditioned myself to train without a training partner as well. I went through that process. And that's not to say training partners aren't useful. I always enjoyed training with people, and I still do now, but I did recondition myself to train alone. So 2006, no problem at all, fully motivated. 2007 was a little bit harder, because I'd won the Worlds, and then I was coming back as a defending champion. And so I had to change my mindset that year. I went from being the underdog to, sort of top dog, and where everyone was trying to take me down. So you have to kind of realign your sort of mental approach at that point. And I did struggle a little bit in 2007 to get through my workouts, but then realigned my sights and thought, I'm only probably going to be in this position once where I'm defending a title, so I make the most of it. But 2007, it was an up and down year for me. I did lose my mother that year later on towards my prep, and that did derail my prep to some degree. But I carried on training because that was a good distraction for me. I could throw myself into my training, and that really helped me get through the bereavement process. I wasn't perhaps arguably at quite my best that year, but certainly good enough for second. But it's very interesting, and I train on my own now, and I've still got. I haven't got the cabin anymore. I've since moved house, so I'm training in a new space now. Training in my garage, and I do hope to make the cabin 2.0 at some point in the future. Hopefully bigger and better.
Yeah, well, I was fortunate. I don't know if you remember this, John. I was fortunate to actually see the cabin. I had when I think it was 2015. I had a posing consultation with you before some of the shows in 2015. And it was a relatively small space, but like you say, just kitted out with absolutely everything, quality kit. So yeah, really interested, and something I think that everyone would be envious of at the moment. But going forward, when you were talking about the 2007 prep there, I remember at the time there was quite a lot of hype going into that Worlds. With it was almost like you versus Jim Cordova. I remember I think Lane Norton had a series on bodybuilding.com, and it was sort of like you two were the front runners, and it was. Did you feel pressure going into that show, being sort of the reigning champion?
Yes, I did. I did sense there was added pressure. At that point, the bodybuilding communities online were quite active, so you'd see little pockets of conversation where people would start mentioning your name, whereas in previous years they might have not mentioned your name. So, and they draw analogies that'd be like John versus Jim. You're absolutely right. There was a video made, on bodybuilding.com. I think perhaps they did sort of a little video sequence of me versus Jim, the rematch, for 2008. So there was lots of hype surrounding that, and I'm not sure how I felt about it. That's something that I'm not used to. So perhaps a little bit mixed feelings about it. Always nice to be mentioned, and in a good light. It's nice that people know who you are once you've achieved something. It's nice for that achievement to be recognised, but then you get the pressure of expectation to deliver, and I sort of had a mixed relationship with that, really, because I've always been quite comfortable with being the underdog and just keeping a relatively low profile going into shows. But Jim was a formidable competitor, and he won his pro card in the INBF a few years prior, then came back in 2007, and we had a really good fight on stage for that win. I mean, Jim came in heavier, very, very dense in the upper body, big shoulders, back, arms. He had a lovely shape to his legs. Perhaps his legs weren't quite as thickly developed as his upper torso, but the overall sort of flow worked really well. He got a lovely sort of classic physique, like a mini Arnold, really, in many ways. And I think that's how Natural Bodybuilding and Fitness magazine sort of pushed him. As he got a magazine cover with Natural Bodybuilding and Fitness, and I remember seeing him. When he won, and on the magazine, I just thought, he deserved it. We had a great battle, but if anyone was going to win, other than me in 2007, it was Jim was right up there. But he wasn't the only one. We had Brandon Greenwood as well. Brandon came through and improved, and 2007, Brandon, I believe, got third. I got second, Brandon got third, so he was chasing me. So there's a whole number of guys who could have turned me over, if I'd have slipped up. It was very small margins between all the places back then.
Yeah, I mean, if looking through, some of the placings on, throughout those years, that the 2004 to 7, some of the names in there, it's you've got the likes of yourself, Brandon, Brian Whitaker, Rodney Hilaire, even I think people like Siobhan Cunningham were coming through as well. Yeah, if anyone, just to Google some of those results from back in those days, it was really was strength in depth. So yeah, well, that's really good. Moving on, Chris, have you got any other questions lined up there before we move on?
Let's move on.
Okay. So one sort of big topic which I thought we absolutely had to cover, and it was obviously mentioned in your other podcast with AJ, was the Jon Harris Forum, which then became the Natural Muscle Forum. For people that don't know, it really was sort of like a hub for natural bodybuilding before the days of social media, in terms of contest prep blogs, just general training and diet advice, as well as sort of show coverage. So I suppose kicking off with, when did you first get the idea to actually make the forum, and like, were you aware of other forums at the time, or was it just sort of a I'll see how this goes?
So going back here to, I think, roughly 2003. So for me, setting up the forum wasn't actually that big a deal, because I'm trained as a computer engineer anyway. I've got programming skills, so it wasn't an enormous decision for me. It was something I actually managed to knock up quite quickly in my spare time, just because I wanted to do a little bit more for natural bodybuilding and get out there. And because there weren't many forums relating to natural bodybuilding at all. I think there was, you got like the big mainstream bodybuilding forums out there. I think like Muscle Mayhem, Get Big, places like that, but not much for natural bodybuilding. I think the BNBF had a little forum and the website, which has grown into something more, bigger in more recent times. But back then there wasn't anything that was not relating to or not associated with the federation. No independent platform in the UK, and I did note that. So yeah, I set up the forum in 03, tagged it was the website and forum on my own personal website. This wasn't on Natural Muscle, it was on, I think I was on johnharris.net back at the time. But I tagged the forum on and didn't expect it to do anything, but I think within the course of a few weeks we were up to maybe a dozen members, and then it just snowballed from there. And I think by the time we got a year fast forward to 2004, we got a few hundred members, and then it was a few hundred more members, and then it was 1,000 members, and it got pretty big. And by the time we were up to sort of 2005, 2006, it was pretty much the hub for natural bodybuilding in the UK. It stayed there. There was another forum called UK Muscle, which Jay Rickaby ran. Just to give credit there, and Giles Thomas, and that was like an alternative place, which had a slightly different flavour to my forum. But between the two, there was always like lots of lots of topics covered, and you always felt you could, if you felt uncomfortable talking about something on their forum, you could talk about it on mine, and vice versa. So there's even maybe a little bit of friendly rivalry between the two, which is never a bad thing. But I was very proud of the forum and really enjoyed working with it, especially in its peak. I'd say between 2005 2015, those sort of 10 years, it was a real hub of activity, and great to see champions come through it as well. People like latch on and learn and absorb knowledge, and then actually see them through their journals and through their contributions follow their career and see them actually do their first contest and progress and win. We were very fortunate to have some quite big names go through the forum over the years. People like Ben Howard, Matt Argall, Glenn Danbury, Dean Garrett. So there's lots and lots. I'm missing out names here. There's dozens and dozens. Cheryl Myers, the 5-time world champion. So we've had lots of contributions over the years from people who have dipped in and out of the forum, and it's just great to have them a part of it and follow their journey, because a lot of those journeys were documented on the forum in one way or another, either through the training log or just small contributions here and there.
Yeah, it really was, and I think as well there was also a lot of big names who had gone on to do other things than just bodybuilding. So I don't if you remember, Martin McDonald was quite big on the forum, who went on to obviously become quite a very successful in sort of nutrition and his sort of Mac nutrition business. And then I remember as well Sam Bond, who used to compete as a heavyweight. He went on to become Atlas the Gladiator, didn't he?
That's right, yeah. I did an interview with Sam Bond shortly after he got the gig to become a gladiator. Everyone was so excited for Sam because he was a heavyweight natural competitor, and he really landed on his feet with that one. And I managed to get an interview with him shortly after he got asked to join the gladiator team, and I think it's still on. Might even still be on Natural Muscle in the archive, so dig it out. And you've mentioned something important there, how people have sort of gone on in bodybuilding and not just become great bodybuilders, but we've had people gone on and done other things relating to the bodybuilding industry. So you talk about Sam being a gladiator. We've had people set up supplement companies. I mean, Glenn Danbury, for example, went through the forum, and we've seen him not only become a great bodybuilder and strength and coach athlete, but also setting up a nutrition company as well. So there's lots of stories of success stories from people who've been through Natural Muscle, and just great to be a part of it. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely, and that just triggers my memory as well when I think it was on your forum back in the sort of early mid 2000s when you mentioned Jason Rickaby, who just set up PhD Nutrition. And they were sort of giving away free samples of their whey, and then obviously things snowballed very quickly into this hugely successful company. But they came from those sort of small, humble beginnings and sort of building their name on the likes of your forum.
Jason Rickaby, I know Jason very well. I've not spoken to him much in recent times. He's a very busy man. I'd imagine running his supplement company right now. But Jason was very visible through the Natural Muscle site as well as the UK Muscle site. So he was quite a high-profile individual before he even set up his supplement company. So if you're in that position where you're benefiting from lots of exposure, become a high-profile name, it just helps with that launch of that new business, because people can connect you to that product because they know who you are. So he's gone places there, and they've done really well for himself. I'm really pleased for him.
Yeah. No, it really was sort of a sort of community that even in recent times I've sort of been at shows and spoken to people who I've never actually met before, but remember from forums and things like that. And it's it really was a hub to help sort of drive the sport forward. Obviously, going forward, social media sort of changed the game quite significantly. And did you, obviously, when you saw things winding down and the popularity of forums becoming less popular, did you ever have any thoughts of of setting up anything similar on the likes of sort of YouTube, Instagram, Facebook?
This is an interesting one, this Tom, because the whole thing kind of snuck up on me gradually. It wasn't an overnight shift. You've got these absolute gigantic tech giants like Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, which have emerged gradually over the last 10 years or so. So in a way, they sort of snuck up from behind and didn't initially see it coming, I must admit. But once they established themselves there, we lost a lot of traffic from the forum to these tech juggernauts, and never got it back. And it changed the landscape. And I did wonder like what I could do to sort of mitigate that. I mean, I can't really compete with the likes of Facebook and Instagram, and maybe there's something you could do on there, but people have got their own spaces, haven't they, on these platforms? So I'm not sure whether I could offer anything as unique as the Natural Muscle Forum, because the forum has actually had something that these other places haven't got. This very structured way of posting and recording things, and accessing the information through a search that is very powerful and with great filters, and the ability to sort of post photos, keep them there, keep training logs. There's actually a lot more technology, you could argue, built into the forum than there are in these other platforms. But my idea was maybe if I was going to do more with Natural Muscle, it may be more along the lines of video content, because the thing I've noticed over recent years is the way people absorb information is different. People tend to prefer to listen to information rather than read it now, possibly because it's easier to do. You can put your headphones on, you can tune into a 1, 2, even 3-hour podcast whilst doing something else, and you can't do that when you're reading. So I think video has changed things, and I think YouTube is definitely the future, and just video in general. So that's where I'm looking now, is video and YouTube. What you guys are doing now, what we're doing, sitting here doing now, I think this is the future, definitely.
Yeah, and I suppose that leads on quite nicely, talking about video. Some people might not be aware, but you actually filmed your own sort of training DVD, didn't you, called Self-Built? How did the idea come about for that? How did you sort of set it up? And more importantly for people, is it still available so people can see how you trained?
It is available. I'll answer the last question first. Yes, the video is still available.
Shameless plug.
Yes, apologies. The video was filmed in 2007, so that was shortly after I won the 2006 World. So I actually stayed on my diet a little while to get that film, because I wanted to keep my condition. And it was filmed in my log cabin gym over the course of a few weeks. I had some help with the cameras. It was filmed on 2 cameras, so we could get different angles of all the exercises, and just cover sort of 4 days of training, I think, plus nutrition and some posing. And the reason I did it was mainly I wanted to. There wasn't many videos out there on natural bodybuilding, so I thought, well, it'd be nice to do something, to get something on the record for natural bodybuilding in the form of a video, because it's a market which hasn't really, there's not much has happened in that arena. And from a personal perspective, I did think, well, it would be nice to get my training on record whilst I'm at the peak of the sport. I didn't want to do it later on down the line when I'd retired. I wanted to do it right at my very best, which was shortly after 2006. And the video has done okay. It's I've sold copies all over the world, mostly to the UK, but also overseas. And I've had some nice feedback from people on the video, and I still hear stories now of people saying, "Oh, I got your video out last week and watched it, and do you remember this, and this?" And it's nice that people still have access to it. But it's on my website at jonharris.com. You can still buy it, and I did a little ebook as well at the same time. So Self Built was the DVD, and I did a book which is available in ebook version now, called Pro Natural, and that's on disc. And again, that covers that covers a greater span of my career, like starting from right at the beginning in my junior days, right up until my turning pro. There's a lot of written content in that, and then lots of info on training and diet too, and posing. So it covers all bases. That.
Yeah, I need to dig that out. It'll come to no surprise, no surprise to people that I've got both of those somewhere hidden away. So that was cool. Moving forward. What about the sort of strive for your pro card? So in the early days, you talked about looking up to the likes of Lee Labrada, Bob Harris, and these sort of big name IFBB guys. Once you sort of became familiar with the BNBF and then the WNBF, did you then start following the natural bodybuilding? The guys at the top there, and were you sort of looking up to those pros, once you were sort of striving to get that pro card?
I did, Tom. It was quite a natural progression, really. I needed a new focus competing in the BNBF and something to look up to. And the guys who were winning then were, as you mentioned, like the likes of Nigel Davis, Dave Goodin. Those two were the big ones in my mind, because they were both middleweights and they were both, world champions, or certainly at the time Nigel was, the top British pro and second in the world. So, and I got to meet Nigel several times as well. So I got to see him in the flesh and see the dimensions of the guy and what he looked like, and he always looked very good, even clothed. He got the big delts, he got a big chest, small waist. He's got a certain presence when you see him. Obviously, he looks even better when he's on stage. But yeah, I cottoned onto that pretty quick, and had these guys pretty much on pedestals as I was competing. Andy Palmer was another one. Yeah. So, and Andy Palmer competed. He obviously wasn't part of the BNBF team as I came in, but Andy Palmer went out. I think when was this? He went out in 2000 and finished fourth in the WNBF Worlds. So he was one of the top guys, and obviously we see more of Andy Palmer now because he's competing. He did very well in the WNBF Worlds sort of Masters division, Grandmasters, and got the win. So he's actively competing today. So these were the people who I was looking up to and trying to learn about, adding size and whilst getting the condition, because I still had to figure out. I had a lot of stuff to figure out before I turned pro. A lot of things to learn before I could make that transition. I had to get through a lot of competition as well. There was my early shows at the BNBF. I suffered. I always finished high, but I had to get through some tough opposition to get that pro card, and a lot of things to learn.
Yeah. So I think that sort of leads on a little bit to what I wanted to just talk about. Something that you touched on in AJ and Lee's podcast was the dominance of the UK team through that early 2000s with with the likes of yourself, Nigel, Rob, Brandon, and then obviously Cheryl and Vicky. Do you think the structure that we've got in the UK is sort of largely responsible for how well the the UK guys and girls do over in, you know, when they compete overseas. Because I think even today, I think there's been a maintenance of that sort of structured system of, you know, going through regional qualifiers, then going to finals, and then having, you know, generally one pro card at the end of it per year. Do you think that sort of filters down and sort of breeds, you know, the cream of the crop, basically?
I think you've summed it up perfectly there, Tom. Really, there's a bottleneck essentially to get out of the amateur ranks into the pro ranks in the UK. There always has been, because we've only got that one big show where people can turn pro, which is the British finals. But you've got this, as you say, filtration process of qualifiers and British finals and overalls that, you know, just takes a group of 100 bodybuilders or whatever it is down to one. And so you inevitably, that one person or two people, you know, or whatever small number of people it is that turn pro in whatever divisions that year, inevitably then are of very high standard. They have to be. And then, you know, a good consequence of that is if they then go out and compete at the Worlds or at an international comp, they stand a very good chance of doing well, because they've had such a hard time to turn pro in the first place. They've really had to up their game to get that pro card. And that's what's happened over the past. You know, we've turned upon the world scene and done well. We've always been up there somewhere in the medals, and on some occasions, you know, high in the medals as well, or even winning. And it's an interesting observation, and we've had lots of discussions about this on the forum back in the day, not just about the way it is in Britain and whether we should offer more pro cards. I mean, that was one discussion, but another comparison was, are the countries giving away too many pro cards? I mean, that was another sensitive topic. There's more qualifiers out there in the States, but it's a bigger country, so they're going to have more shows, aren't they? But therefore, they were churning out pros at a faster rate than the UK were. But then there was always the discussion of, are there pros of a high standard as ours? And, you know, it's a very difficult apples and oranges type debate. And I don't think you can do a straight comparison of the UK with, say, America, because they're two completely different countries, different size, different talent pools in bodybuilding. I mean, bodybuilding is big over here, but it's even bigger in the States. You know, there's a lot more bodybuilders out there, so they're going to have more pros. But the standard's super high over here, always has been, and it's something we should be proud of. With all the federations, it's always been right up there. And conditioning as well. Like we're big on conditioning in this country, aren't we? So always have been. You know, that work ethic, it's in us, and it's, you know, that it made it hard for me to my pro card. I really had to figure out how to get my condition nailed before I was able to turn pro in 2003, and I had a lot to learn to get to that point, but eventually I figured it out, you know.
Yeah, and did you, when you first got that pro card, and you went straight over to New York, obviously, you know, the results speak for themselves, and you took second in your class in your very first Worlds there, but you briefly touched on this before. Did you feel straight away like you belonged there, or did you feel a bit out of your depth, and did it take you like a bit of time to acclimatise to being in the pro ranks?
There's two sort of ways I can answer this question. When I finally turned pro in 2003, I did feel like I was ready to become a pro, because I'd spent the whole of 2002 and 2003 prepping like a pro should. So I was eating clean in the off season, didn't allow my weight to escalate. I was being very strict with my diet, didn't take a holiday, or if I did, I was very careful on the holiday with what I ate. So I made all those sacrifices that I thought a pro should. So I kind of lived the life of a pro, in the sense that I was very strict on myself in 2002. So when I got the pro card, I kind of felt ready for it. But then when I went out to compete in the Worlds, it was such a shock on how they run the show out there and the way they move the athletes around on stage, and they've got such high expectations of you on stage to perform. It's relentless up there, and the lineups are absolutely enormous. You know, we're talking 15, 20 guys on stage at once, and I was completely unprepared for that, and slightly overwhelmed. And obviously, I wasn't prepared to be stood right in between Nigel Davis and Dave Goodin either side of me, you know, and being moved around in that kind of cluster in the middle. Obviously, I had a very good year going out in 2003, and that kind of shocked me. But so I had to kind of adapt very quickly, and I don't think that first year I was fully ready for that. Maybe 2004, I was. So yeah, maybe it took a full year to get used to, you know, what was expected on a pro stage.
Yeah. And obviously you continue to make those improvements each year, and actually took the year out in 2005 and came back and claimed that title. When we had Brian Whitaker on the podcast not too long ago, and I think he was talking about this, because obviously it was such a strive to get to that point of winning a WNBF overall title for him. That was his big goal, and almost when he'd achieved it, it was just this massive sense of accomplishment of that was the one goal that he wanted to hit. Did you feel like, was it hard to motivate yourself after you'd done that, or did it, on the flip side of that, did it make you more motivated to want to sort of maintain and even improve on that?
Well, first off, I'd say I was delighted for Brian to get that win. Just to go off on a small tangent there, I'd been tracking Brian's progress for many years, and we actually became very good friends. And before the Worlds, we'd have a little dialogue, and Brian sometimes would use me as a sort of sounding board. Send me a few photos through, and I'd give him an assessment. And I was always so eager to find out how Brian did. And when he finally got the overall win, I think I punched the air at my computer when I found out. But yeah, so that was one thing. But just going to the sense of accomplishment, yes, I got that after the 2006 win. A massive sense of accomplishment. For me, that was a 5-year-long campaign from 2001 to 2006 to get that world title, because it was always there at the back of my head, even from the early days. I thought, I'm on a long journey here, and it's going to take many years to get there. But when I finally lifted that trophy, I had a huge sense of accomplishment and a sense of peace as well. And I think Brian, I had this conversation with Brian too, and he could relate to this. It's almost like the fire gets dampened down a little bit, which kind of leads us to your next point, because with that sense of peace comes a sense of calmness and maybe a lack of aggression in the gym, because you feel that you've achieved from the sport what you set out to get from it. So then when you go back into the following year, and for me that was defending the world title, all of a sudden I hadn't got that stuff in the basement anymore, that fire burning hard, and I had to sort of try and rekindle that flame for my defense. And that was a tricky thing to do, and the only thing I could kind of like get a handle on was the fact that, look, this might be my only chance to ever defend a title in my career, and I shouldn't waste that opportunity, and let's just run with it. And the thing is, actually, I made some good gains in 2007. It's probably the biggest version of me that I'd ever built in the off season. And I probably made some miscalculations coming down in the end in 07 that year. But it's I know this is all ifs, buts, and maybes, but I think if I'd managed to sort of steer myself in 07 in the way that I wanted to, maybe I could have, that could have been a version of me that was that was significantly better than 06. But we'll never know. It's easy to talk about these things in hindsight, isn't it? But yeah, for sure, it's a different mindset after you win a big one and then come back. And maybe this is one reason that you don't see too many WNBF pros coming back time and time again once they've won the big one. You know, it does happen, but you don't see these huge strings of multi, you know, of wins over many years. I think we've maybe had guys win it a couple of times and no more. I don't think anyone's done it 3 times, have they? So
not that I'm aware of. No, that's interesting, insightful perspectives there. I guess switching gears a little bit. I just wanted to touch a little bit on something that you brought up on again on AJ's podcast with Lee about these Dr. Joe's muscle camps. I know that I've got a feeling, were there some videos around at the time where I think you posted some on the forum, and it was over in the States with, and I think Lane Norton might have been there, and there was quite some big names, and I think maybe Brian as well. And you were talking quite fondly about those and about the, you know, how valuable they were and sort of a really unique sort of gathering. Is that something that you've put sort of quite a lot of thought into perhaps, you know, bringing over to the UK at some point in the future? And how, I mean, do you think it would work over here, or is it more of just sort of an idea you had, or is it something that you're sort of actually, you know, planning?
Well, I haven't got plans today. We touched on it in the previous podcast with Lee and AJ, and we didn't really expect to go there with that conversation. So it was very much off the hoof discussion. And I've not thought about it that much since I came back. I mean, I think we had some discussions on it on the forum when I came back, when I was posting up some photos from the event and talking about it. And we had we definitely had some forum threads on it, and there's interest there. Whether the UK is ready for something like this, I don't know. And if I'm being perfectly honest, I'm not sure if the muscle camps are still being run in the States at the moment by Joe or anyone else. I'm not sure, because it's been a long time. This was 2007, so 13 years ago. So I'm not up to date on how popular muscle camps have been. Obviously, they've not been able to do anything like in the current climate with the lockdown, but we're going to have to get through all that first. But it's an interesting and it's an open question. I haven't got any plans. No, there's nothing that I'm hiding. I'm not suddenly going to announce the muscle camp 2021, but I'm always open to discussion. And you know, if someone likes the sound of the idea and wants to get involved in one way or another, either on an organisational side, or they think it's something they would love to sign up to, you know, to learn more, then sure, reach out to me through email, and you know, we'll sort of make notes. And where there's a will, there's a way in this thing, and I always keep an open mind with ideas in bodybuilding to see if there's ways we can grow the sport and get more people in and just have fun. You know, we've all been through a tough last few months with this lockdown situation. So I'm sure we'll all want to get out the other side of it, and then looking forward to getting back to the gyms and whatnot and training. And yeah, who knows where things could go 2021 and beyond. I'm still actively involved in the sport, even though I'm not competing. I'm still judging. I've judged for all 3 of the natural federations, the BNBF, the NPA, and more currently UK DFBA. I'm an active judge there, so I'm still very much involved with things, and I want to continue to be involved with things. So, so maybe muscle camp is something we can look at. You know, I'd like to have more discussions with people. So maybe if this is something that you can, you know, maybe talk to, you know, other guests about in the future, and bring it up, and we can kick the idea around. And if there's enough demand there, enough interest there, then who knows, maybe we could like get something off the ground at some point. And what do you guys think? You know, have you got any sort of ideas on it? You know, Chris is.
I'd love that.
Yeah,
I'd go. Certainly, yeah. And you know, talking to some of our UK pros, you know, who they're obviously really passionate about the whole sport and giving back as well. I personally think, I mean, I can't speak for them for definite, but there are certainly some that I'm sure would love to get involved in and sort of that. I mean, a muscle camp. Rob Waterhouse would be all over that. Yeah. I mean, he's more than once. He's like, you know, we've been talking obviously throughout this whole COVID-19 thing, and he's being sort of not able to go to work to do his normal day job, has just absolutely relished basically being full-time bodybuilder, getting up, cardio, training, cooking, eating, you know, and all the rest of that, and he's sort of deeply ingrained in it, and he loves it. So I think he's certainly a person that would probably love to get involved in something like that. But yeah, no, I'd relish the opportunity for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would be very well received, and I think we're in quite a unique sport, aren't we? Where you've got such almost easy access to. It's pretty mind blowing, really, that you can just, you know, we can sit here and chat to someone who has sort of reached the sort of elite levels of our sport, and you know, with all of our guests, and it's, you know, it's quite unique about natural bodybuilding. And I think if there was something like that where people could gather, you know, like-minded people and have something like a muscle camp, you know, I very much think it would be extremely well received. So I'm sure that discussions will maybe start from here, and maybe some people will get in touch with you, John.
I think that's how the way. Yeah, that's how these things start, really. Just conversation and getting people talking. You know, it takes quite a degree of organisation, and you want to know that there's a market for it, really, that people want to get involved, because you need to do it on some kind of scale, don't you? You know, you need more than a handful of people, and you need people both sides. You need people like to run it, whether they be sort of top level amateurs or pros, you know, a mix of both. And you want people to subscribe to it as well. And all that's got to be coordinated. You need a venue, you need people to stay. These things, just going off the template when I went out, you know, to do this thing with Dr. Joe in Indiana, in Evansville, back in 2007, and it was very well organised. Joe, there was a bunch of us out there. There was me, there was Dr. Joe, he had Dave Goodin, he had Jim Cordova, Lane Norton was there. I mean, this was before Lane Norton, you know, got hugely. I mean, he was popular back then, but he's like even more massively popular now. So it's good to have Lane there, and we had a lot of people turn up to train with us, and it was all very tightly scheduled over 2 or 3 days. We had lots of training, one-on-one. Nutrition, you know, meals all cooked for us and prepared, and in between all that we had the seminars delivered. So you know, we all got up and did little talks on training and nutrition, contest prep, posing, all these little classes which were dotted throughout the day over the course of 2 or 3 days, and then it was all topped off at the end with a big party. We all went out and had drinks, and it was you know, let our hair down. It was an incredible experience, and I always remember saying to Joe afterwards, you know, this is something we need to sort of think about bringing back to the UK at some point. And it was a conversation that was sincere, but it just never quite got off the ground, and it's always been parked as an idea. Maybe at some point in the future we can bring it to life.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be amazing.
Watch this space, maybe. Okay. I suppose again. Sorry, go on.
Oh no, go on. I was going to maybe touch on some of our usual features there for a minute.
Yeah. That's so. I just, if we just one more question, and then should we do both of those, and then wrap up, because we're coming just over an hour and a half. So,
which is great.
I suppose just one thing again, which was touched upon in your other chat was about your contest prep sort of strategies, and you very much favoured like a 12-week diet rather than sort of a more prolonged diet, which are popular with other people. I was just interested in as your thoughts on whether that approach relies on you staying, relatively leaner throughout the off season, and if so, what sort of how much heavier than your contest weight did you generally used to go?
It does require you to stay leaner there, Tom. I probably went no more than 10 pounds, 12 at the most over my contest weight in the off season to do the 12-week diet. You can't blow up in the off season and come down in 12 weeks unless you're losing body fat at a really rapid rate of knots. It's just not possible. And if you're losing weight at a fast rate, then you're going to be arguably losing muscle tissue in the process as well and going catabolic, aren't you? So things have to be carefully pieced together to do a successful 12-week diet. So, but it wasn't a problem for me to stay lean in the off season. I was fully prepared to make that sacrifice as a pro. And I just saw that as part of the package. I thought, if I'm going to be successful as a WNBF pro bodybuilder and try and get to that, that pinnacle of the sport, I'll live the bodybuilding lifestyle 24/7, and I'll eat clean. I don't think I hardly ever drank a drop of alcohol while I was competing at that level. Maybe the odd glass of wine at Christmas and birthdays, but nothing. I wouldn't go out drinking every weekend. I was never a big drinker anyway, so that wasn't a problem for me. But yeah, the thing is, I could not do a 20-week, 24-week diet. I just could not do it. When I flip the switch and decide to compete for a show, I'll become ultra focused, but I can only maintain that intensity for 12, maybe 14 weeks max. And if I was to go, I know that when I get to the end of that prep, I'm mentally exhausted. So if I was to even attempt to bulk up hard in the off season and then come down hard over 20 weeks, I'll probably get to 6 weeks out and then just run out of steam and want to come off the diet. So it's the strategy that worked for me. It's not going to work for everybody. Some people maybe, prefer. I know Brian Whittaker, just to use like another example of a guy who gets an incredible condition, but he has a very extended diet period of, best part of half a year, I think.
Yeah.
He climbs up in body weight relatively high, gets super strong in the off season, and then diets gradually for quite an extended period of time. But it works well for him. So, that's great. But everyone's got a different take on it, and you need to figure out what works best for you. But for me, 12 weeks was just perfect.
Yeah.
And I could lose, if I got 10 pound over in the off season, I could lose £1 a week for 10 weeks. Then I've got 2 weeks of contingency at the end to dial things in. Yeah. And it was ideal.
Did you used to do much, did you employ much cardio in the off season?
Very little, but then I am an active guy. When I'm away from the computer and not doing my computer work, I do have quite a lot of hobbies and interests outside the sport. I love working on my house. I love DIY. I'm always active doing stuff. And I'm a big believer in just active cardio. So not necessarily on the treadmill or on the bike, but just going outdoors, walking, doing stuff, just getting stuff done and being productive. I'm not very good at sitting still unless I have to sit and do computer work. When I'm not at the computer working, I'm always out and about. So to answer that question, the short answer is no. I didn't tend to do any cardio in the off season. I am blessed with a pretty decent metabolism anyway. So I never seem to sort of gain that much extra weight unless I'm kind of force feeding myself the calories. If I'm eating a sensible diet, and I've never been an enormous eater anyway. My calories don't ever climb super high. Maybe off season between 3.5, maybe 4,000 tops. So, you know, it's still a sensible amount of calories for a bodybuilder, even in the off season. And I like eating clean. Yeah, I'm built for the sport in many ways, because I'm perfectly happy to eat clean foods pretty much year round, with the odd treat here and there.
Yeah.
And at the end of your contest preps, did you kind of favor like almost like a reverse diet approach, or did you like to get straight back to maintenance calories, or, you know, surplus to that pretty much immediately?
Well, I've tried both. In 2007, when I filmed my DVD, I stayed on the diet after the 2006 Worlds and very carefully amped up my calories. So that was a reverse diet experiment, if you will. And I did find that quite challenging, because my joints didn't recover very quick. I was getting a lot of stiffness in the joints, and I wasn't able to gain any muscle tissue in that period. So I concluded that it's not a good place to stay. Once you finish the show and you're in that very low body fat level of 5%, you want to get out of there as quickly as you can into a more manageable zone. So reverse dieting, not really. I think you should perhaps eat up, well, not necessarily gorge yourself on food, but just resume normal eating patterns after a show and get your body weight up to something more sensible. And so your hormones can come back, your natural hormones, your testosterone levels can restore, and you can get yourself back into that muscle gaining phase again. But at the same time, don't go the opposite way and absolutely stuff yourself full of calories, because that can be really uncomfortable. I've done that a few times, and just let the floodgates open after the show, you know, and you're putting on, you know, a stone in a few days, you know, and you can feel it. You just bog down with the food, and I'm sure that's not good for you either. So just a sensible approach, and just resume normal eating habits after a contest, and trying to get your body weight up to something that's safe, that will let you start gaining muscle again, and protect your joints whilst you're training.
What's your favoured sort of diet? Do you prefer high carbs, high protein, moderate, low carbs? What works best for you? Obviously, I know because you do the shorter diets and stuff.
Yeah, it's sort of middle of the road, Chris. Really, I'm sorry, this doesn't sound very groundbreaking, does it? But I don't subscribe to ultra high carb or ultra low carb either, because I think you need something in the middle. It's always worked well for me anyway. So maybe 200 grams of protein, 300 grams of carbs, 50 grams of fats, or thereabouts. You know, some tweaking, but yeah, my macros were very sort of middle of the road coming into a contest. The only thing I would do is manipulate the carbs up and down as the diet progressed, and trim them down each week or two. So, for example, there'd be carbs in my last meal at night at the start of the diet, but as the diet progressed and I started tightening things up, I would eliminate the carbs later on in the day, and carry on that process until towards the end of the show. Most of my carbs are in the morning or afternoon,
yeah,
and reduce them that way. Protein would always stay relatively high at 1 gram per pound body weight or thereabouts. May even increase protein slightly towards the end, just as for insurance. And then good fats would always stay there. That would be the omega-3s, the omega-6 and 9s.
Yeah,
always keep them in throughout. But I was always really careful with the carbs, because if I took the carbs too low, then I just couldn't get my workouts done effectively. I try go in the gym and train legs on an empty tank, and you're not going to get very far. So I always used to schedule my leg workouts after my cheat meal. So once a week I would have a cheat meal, you know, like a big curry or something, or pizza or whatever it was, and then the following day I'd always go in and train legs, and those calories would just get burned off.
Yeah, fill with energy.
Yeah.
That's great.
Awesome. Well, we're coming up to the near, just shy of 2 hour mark. So I'll hand over to Chris to just sort of wrap up with our two sort of regular features that we ask.
Yeah. Right. So if you've seen any of our other podcasts before, John, you see that we have a Bodybuilding Room 101 to begin with. Obviously, it's a bit less familiar to our American pros sometimes. We have to maybe explain it a little bit. But basically, if there's anything about modern day or current bodybuilding and about the whole industry as a whole, is there anything about that you would quite happily place into Room 101?
Well, it's a good question, isn't it? It is a good question. There's probably a few bits here I could talk about, but if I was just to pick out one thing that does annoy me, it's image filters on photos. When people post selfies of themselves and they doctor the photos, from the original, they apply. I mean, it's all very well adding a little bit of contrast to your photo to, bring out the colours, but some of these filters now that people can apply to their photos before they post them on their feeds just transform their physiques.
Yeah.
And you're not looking at the real thing anymore, are you?
No.
People are living in a world now where they're looking at photos of their competitors in completely unrealistic lighting. They've been sharpened to within an inch of their lives and, photoshopped out of all proportions in some cases. So every time I see a photo now of some amazing bodybuilder, like the first question that always pops into my head is, has it been filtered? Tinkered with? Yeah, has it been filtered? So, and I just wish we could go back to the days where photos were untampered with and just published raw as they were. You'd set up a spot in the kitchen or wherever it was in your house where the lighting's good. You'd take a photo and you'd publish it. But now there's just way too many filters for my liking.
Yeah. Sadly, for a lot of competitors, you can't take those filters on stage with you. So if you look great in all these pictures leading up to it and trying to strike fear into maybe some of your fellow competitors, and then you get to the stage and something has gone wrong or you're not as sharp as those pictures look, then you're doing yourself a disservice, I think. Placing an expectation of yourself really, really high. And if you don't hit that when you get to the stage, then it's just going to be disappointing for you, I think.
That's it. Yeah, you're creating false illusion there, aren't you? Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, Tom, were you going to say something on that?
Yeah, it's just, I suppose, if you have got quite a big online social media presence as well, and people are aware of you going into the show, and they're expecting you to look a certain way and you don't, then that is then, perhaps if a judge is aware of you and they've seen these pictures, then it then becomes a bit underwhelming, doesn't it? I suppose we've talked a lot about this kind of instant gratification culture, in that people like to post these photos sometimes with filters for likes on a photo, isn't it? So it's an interesting debate, and it's I don't think anyone's mentioned that yet with our guests so far. So yeah, that's a good one.
So moving on from that, that was a good example. So thanks for that, John, mate. The next one is we like to touch on the best and worst moments, and because I think everyone's got their best and worst moments in their bodybuilding career, but it's not always the usual of winning a pro card or winning a certain placing or something. There's another experience. So have you got something that you hold more dearly than the rest? And obviously, and conversely to that, what would you say was maybe your worst moment, if you've even got one?
Oof. Yeah, there's a few stories here, Chris. I could rattle off on both sides. If I'm not allowed to count contest wins, then probably my first time on stage as a junior was a special time, as I recounted at the last on the last podcast. I did win, but I won by default. I was the only competitor, so that was I didn't really class that as a win in the usual sense. But it just hooked me into the sport.
Yeah.
And then if it wasn't for that hook, then I wouldn't have carried on competing. So that was a special time. Just to accompany that, it was an amazing accomplishment for me personally to finally get that pro card in 2003, and then in 2006, 3 years later, to raise that WNBF Pro World title. That for me was the pinnacle. And in those two, I'm counting wins there. So those sort of 3 moments were sort of key moments for me. If I can link 3 in together, and then to go down the other side of the hill, if you will, on downers in the sport. Just to pull away from competition for a moment. Like whenever I had an injury, I mean, you guys know what this is like. It's whether you're preparing for a contest and you pull a muscle and it puts you out of action, or whether it's something in the off season, it's a bit more serious and you're out of action. Those things really used to, drag me down, and they'd always happen at a time when training was going so well. I'm fortunate I've never had any serious muscle tears or anything, but I have, been a good run of injuries over the years that I've had to battle with. Hence, I train incredibly safe now when I'm in the gym. Yeah. So that's on the gym side of things, but competition side, I did struggle a little bit in my last junior show, just coming back on that plane flight from competing in the Worlds in '94. And at that point, I thought that was it for me, my bodybuilding career, because I hadn't found the ANB or the BNBF at that point to compete in. I didn't even know they existed. So in '94, I actually thought that was the end of my bodybuilding career as a junior, finished early. And that was quite a sad moment. I wouldn't say it was my worst moment, but it's just sad.
Yeah.
And it took another 7 years to find my feet again and find the natural end of the sport and that ladder that I could progress up. So that sad story in '94 had eventually a happy ending.
That's a good angle really to come at it from, because a lot of people would count, say, losses at something and so. But yeah, I can appreciate what you're saying there on both counts, the good and the bad there. Thanks for that.
Yeah. Right. Awesome. Well, we are just under 2 hours, and I think we've, we apologise because we've taken up another 2 hours on top of the 3.5 hours the other day. But I'm sure people will absolutely lap this up. The opportunity to hear from yourself, Jon, with your history in the sport and your wisdom. So we're just absolutely, extremely grateful to have you join us today. I've really enjoyed the chat. I'm sure Chris has really enjoyed the chat, and I'm sure that the viewers will as well. So this will go up on the YouTube page and also on all the podcast platforms. So it's now on Apple Podcasts for those of you that like to download and listen on your commutes and things like that. So any closing words from anyone?
Guys, I just want to say thank you for having me on the show. It's been wonderful to get online and do some video content for me, because it's been a while since I've been on the stage, so I feel like I've took a back seat in the sport over recent years. So it's been a bit of a shot in the arm for me to get out and do 2 podcasts back to back in such quick succession, and I hope the listeners get something from it. Just feel free to reach out to me. I've got a website, jonharris.com and naturalmuscle.co.uk. So get in touch if you if you want to drop me a line, talk about bodybuilding. So brilliant. Thanks, guys. Good luck with the rest of the series. And yeah, I'm going to be tuning into future episodes and looking out for who comes on next. So good luck with it all.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. And just say thanks again for coming on, sparing the time to talk to us. I know I've not given as much input today on this one, but I've just enjoyed really listening to you and hearing about everything you've done in bodybuilding and what you're continuing to doing. And I hope that you do stay in the bodybuilding world for a long time to come. I really appreciate it. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Brilliant. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, John. We'll all catch up soon.
Take care.
Have a good day.
See you in the
Bye
next
now.
episode.